We're very fortunate to have her come here to speak to us about how music affects the mind and how, as her title says, how music can make you better. Thank you.
Ačiū labai už tą šiltą pakvietimą. Man čia labai smagu būti. I'm going to give this talk in English because it's 8 o'clock and I had a frosé with my lobster roll. So it's too much to try to, pull. I highly recommend, by the way. But no, in truthfulness, it's because this work is very dear to my heart and I want to make sure that I'm able to express it in its nuanced forms. As I mentioned, I led for a long time these dual careers as a singer. My mom, many of you probably know, the Viskontaitė, instilled in us a love for music and especially of singing. Choral singing is her specialty. And for a long time, I simply just wanted to be an opera singer. But we grew up at a time where I think, as many of you can relate, as immigrants, as children of immigrants, that having a solid career, one that would always be useful, was really important. And it wasn't clear for a lot of years, and maybe only now are we seeing that music is, in fact, essential, not just something nice to have. So my parents would say to me, well, you can do anything you want, but first you have to have a doctorate of some kind. So I went and got a PhD, not a real doctorate degree, but it was good enough for them. And it really allowed me to focus on what I loved, which is understanding the human mind and understanding how this organ inside of our skull gives rise to all of the wonderful variety of what it means to be human. As I did my PhD, I started to see ways that my singing career and then eventually directing operas, how I could start to pull the science into the art. And the two started to meld together. And now we have this amazing time in this confluence of science and art where people are starting to see that, in fact, science and art are really not that different. We might use different methods. We might place more or less emphasis on subjectivity versus objectivity, but ultimately we're after the same thing, which is to understand what it means to be human. And even in this era, where so much of our time is spent online in these frivolous distractions, we're starting to realize that what we really seek is not just goods and services or products or even experiences and entertainment. What we seek is transformation. And so we're entering what hopefully will be a fruitful transformation economy, where people who are in the business of transforming us are going to also start to be valued. We're a long way from there yet, but there is this interest in not just going to a show or to a place, but to be transformed by these experiences. And it couldn't come at a more important time, because at the same time, we're in the midst of a loneliness epidemic. And in fact, there are strong health consequences to loneliness and isolation. The US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy put out a report showing that lacking social connection is damaging to our health, just as damaging as some of the most damaging things we can do to ourselves. And yet we still spend more and more time alone. And that's not just true of us as we get older. Today's youth are spending more time alone or with their devices than any previous generation. So we shouldn't be surprised that the outcome is that they are more anxious, that they are more depressed, that their mental health is suffering. So how do we combat this force of isolation, this technology that is pulling us apart, putting us into silos, and leading us away from one another? About a year and a half ago now, I was approached by the leadership of last summer's Dainų šventės Festivalis Lietuvoj. So it was the 100th anniversary of the Lithuanian Song Celebration that happens about every 4 years. And they reached out to me and they said, how do we get these young people to value the work and the commitment that it takes to participate in this festival? And so that was a tough thing to think about and tough thing to do. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time in today's talk telling you about some of the results that we found, the way that we designed this particular study and some of the results. But before we get there, I want to just put into context why an event like that might be transformative. And in this era of blending art and science, one of the great things that has come out of it is that we are starting to understand some of the features of these most moving and transformative experiences. And in science, we tend to call one of the emotions that we feel when we are transformed awe. You can imagine what a great privilege and joy it is for me to talk to you about awe on the grounds of a Franciscan monastery, which in my understanding is all about the awe of nature, the awe of spirituality, how understanding and becoming aware of our experiences is what can transform us. So how do we define awe? What are the core features according to science? Well, first of all, we are encountering something that transcends ordinary experiences in its size, scope, complexity, or significance. It presents us with a cognitive challenge where we have to change the way we think in order to process this new experience. We feel small or insignificant, but that's not a bad thing. It essentially means that we are in the presence of something greater. We feel more connected to others, to nature, to the universe, to God. And the perception of time either slows down or is expanded. Somehow time doesn't seem to operate on the same ticking clock. And we often get these physical sensations like goosebumps or shivers, or we say we're moved. And finally, we have a sense of going beyond the ordinary experience and that our consciousness is expanded. So if we know that these are the features of awe, we can now go and look at the experience of an event like Dainų Šventė and see, did it induce awe in people? How common was that experience? Can we measure it? Can we see whether or not it has impacts on other elements of our lives? And going into the Dainų Šventės experiment, we already knew that awe has cognitive and psychological benefits. We knew that it enhances creativity. Being out in nature makes you more creative. It increases curiosity and wonder. It promotes learning. It reduces depression and anxiety. It increases life satisfaction and well-being. It enhances mood and positive emotions. And it promotes resilience. How many of you have gone out and had an experience in nature or in another awesome, in the literal sense, place and felt like you could handle your problems better after that experience? Things just didn't seem so bad. So last March, as I mentioned, I was contacted by a colleague at Vilnius University and by the head of the Natural Cultural Center, Saudas Liausa, who had organized, essentially was the head of this 100th anniversary event. And we only had 4 months to put together a study on how this event might impact the participants and the audience members. So I called in all my friends. I called in my friends from the Technical University of Denmark, from Vilnius, from my own university, and we had a 3-part study. The first was that we looked at surveys before the festival, during the festival, and after the festival. And by the festival, we mean before the full week, during or just after the final Dainų Dienos Koncertas, which is the culminating event, and then about a week after the festival. And we had people aged 11 to 89, thousands of responses in each of these surveys. We also, with the help of Danish Technical University, measured heart rates. So we had 35 performers, 35 audience members fitted with heart rate monitors that were research grade, so we could track their physiology, track literally how the event affects their heart. And then we had cognitive health measures, so we had 150 participants participate in a mobile brain tracking study to see whether a life spent in the context of musical training can actually protect you from cognitive decline. So just before the festival, we did not see much of a difference in general well-being between the audience and the participants. The participants were slightly higher numerically, but in terms of their general well-being, they weren't necessarily better off. But after the festival, the audience improved and the participants showed a significant enhancement in their general well-being. This was very surprising because this well-being measure is just 5 questions that was designed by the World Health Organization that really shouldn't move that much in a week or two. It was surprising that we got such a big boost after this one event, given that these are questions like, how refreshed do you feel today? How well are you able to handle the stresses of life? These are pretty fundamental questions that generally don't shift that much week to week, and yet we saw a pretty significant effect. That was especially true for choral singers. So we asked people who, do you sing in a choir regularly? And before the festival, there wasn't really much of a difference between those who sang in a choir regularly and those that didn't. But after the festival, the ones who sang in a choir and participated in the festival had the biggest increases. So being a participant in the festival does seem to matter, although just being in the audience also gives you a boost in well-being. So we see that awe has physical health benefits. It lowers stress hormones and cytokines. It boosts your immune system. It is even associated with better cardiovascular health. And we can talk about some of the heart rate data in a minute. But we're starting to see now a picture evolving that the experience of awe itself can have these measurable benefits. And when we go back to the core features of awe, the physical sensations, feeling the goosebumps, is one that we can really measure because for a lot of us, either singing or experiencing music that moves us does give us the goosebumps. And scientists who study the impact of music on us love the chills. We call it the chills or the goosebumps because we can track it very easily with our physiological measures. You can see exactly when someone is experiencing the chills on the basis of their heart rate or their breathing rate or on their skin. And so we know quite a bit about the kind of music that gives us the chills. And then we know that this experience of the chills is related to this larger experience of awe. So we wanted to look at the entire concert program to see what are the pieces of music that we suspected were most likely to give people the chills. And from the existing literature, we know that there are certain musical features that are common to music that gives us the chills. So for example, a big increase, sudden increase in volume, an unexpected harmonic change, the entry of a new voice, especially if they enter at a higher pitch range, this momentary creation of dissonance before it's resolved, and when music suddenly extends into significantly higher or lower frequencies than previously established. If you have never been to a dainų šventė, especially one in the Estrada Vilniuje, I want to play you a video of what it's like. Because until I experienced it, I couldn't imagine what it was like. And it really is like no other experience on earth. It is not just a bunch of choirs singing on a stage together. It is 12,000 voices singing the same pieces of music that they have spent 4 years learning and perfecting to an audience of tens of thousands. Now, the entire Shvante was based around the tema Kur Gira Jalwaya. So Kur Gira Jalwaya is sometimes considered the national anthem when you can't sing the national anthem. It's like the second national anthem, and especially when it was banned during the Soviet occupation, people would sing, when the national anthem was banned, people would sing Kur Gira Jalwaya when they could, and it brought people together. So it's long, rich history. It also has all of these features. You'll notice that there are times where there's a sudden voice entering at a higher range. There are these moments of dissonance before resolution. There are unexpected harmonic changes. There's an expanded frequency range. It contains all of it. So we suspected that because it was the culminating song in the Shvente, that it had such a layered history that it would be the one that would give people the chills most likely. And so let's listen to Kur Gira Jalwaya, no appare plumato da Shvente sta Yungdama. So I have played this video to an entire room full of people from the American League of Symphony Orchestras, 600 orchestra leaders, and they all got the chills too. So in the lab, we are told that getting the chills from music only happens to special brains, that you have to have a tight connection between how your brain processes sound and these other elements of emotion. But in our study, we found that 95% of people who responded got the chills. So I don't think this is a rare phenomenon. I don't think you need a special brain. I think you need a special experience. And I think it needs to be in a context that induces awe. And the lab doesn't usually do that. So what did we see? We saw that the vast majority of people who responded to our studies got the chills, and that feeling the chills was related to feeling connected to other people. That when you get the chills, you feel like you are part of something better, that you have this social connection. And so Daimúsvente was a very powerful inducer of the state of awe. We did a whole situational awe questionnaire, and we found that especially, even in the viewers, I should say, this average mean score of awe on this scale was higher than any of the previously reported studies where people were brought into the lab to induce awe. So if they watched videos, or if they came to the lab and they were supposed to have an experience laced with awe, this number is still higher than those lab experiments, but the participants even more so. And when we experience awe together, we feel more connected. So when we participate in the experience, we also have a greater sense of social connection. And then we looked at collective self-esteem. So this is the pride that we have for being part of a collective, and this was generally higher in people who sang in choirs than those who didn't. And I'll come back to this measure of self-esteem and how it relates to the Daimúsvente in a minute. But before I get there, I want to talk a little bit more about how your brain turns sound into music. Because we don't all have the same experience when we hear the same piece of music. Some of us prefer one genre or another. Some of us have more experience or less experience. And that all matters in terms of how music affects your brain. So let's start with the rhythm. We actually don't see the rhythm, we feel the beat. And in order to understand how it is that we feel the beat, how rhythm perception works, we need to talk about the sea squirt. This is a little marine animal, probably out there in the port of Kennebunkport, that when it is born, it grows a primitive nervous system, a little tail like a tadpole, and so it grows this primitive brain, and it swims around in the ocean until it finds a nice rock, and then when it finds the nice rock, it attaches itself to the rock, and it eats its brains. Because it no longer needs a nervous system, it no longer needs a brain because it's never going to go anywhere again. So one of the ideas is that we have a nervous system, we have a brain because we're built to move. And in order to coordinate our muscles and our actions with our goals, we need a nervous system that pulls everything together. But if we just stay still and we don't go anywhere, we don't really need a brain, and it atrophies. Some people say that this is what happens when professors get tenure. I hope it's not true, because I just got tenure, and I really like having a brain. But one of the other features is that music makes us feel good by raising the levels of a neurochemical called dopamine. And a lot of us think of dopamine as a pleasure chemical. It's the thing we get when we eat a donut or we do something pleasurable. Our brain is awash with dopamine. But dopamine has many more functions in the brain, and one of them is to coordinate movement. And that's why in Parkinson's disease, where you have a loss of the cells that make dopamine, we have movement problems. So in the brain of a person with Parkinson's, the dopamine levels are lower than in a age-matched healthy brain. And one of the main problems in Parkinson's disease is not the tremor or the shaking, It's the inability to get going. It's the inability to get up out of a chair, to pull a cereal box off the shelf. Those are usually the first signs that something is wrong. And in fact, that's where we see the dopamine problem. Here too, music can have a transformative effect. And I want to show you the story of Larry Jennings. This is Larry. This is about 10 years after he was diagnosed. He's 73 in this video, and you can see that he takes very short steps, that he has to lean on the walker, that his occupational therapist, his physical therapist, Anastasia, has to hold him up to keep him balanced. And his head is down in this physical therapy session. He's not really having a good time. He's working very hard. Anastasia Gunlock, who is his therapist, tragically died a year after she posted these videos, but I have permission from her family to keep showing them because I feel like it shows us her legacy, and it's a really beautiful story. Because what she realized is that maybe in her physical therapy sessions, something as simple as music can help Larry in more ways than just getting him moving. So she asked him what his favorite piece of music was, and he told her, and then she found it on her phone, and then she began playing it, and she captured the results. And you'll see that in the first 10 seconds or so, Larry doesn't move. He takes a minute for his brain to feel the beat. His steps are further apart. They're much faster. His head is no longer down. He's holding his head up. And my favorite part is the one that comes next. Just a few minutes later, he doesn't even need the walker anymore. And it's not hard anymore. He's singing. It's fun. But here comes the best part. Larry is no longer a patient. Larry is a partner, and he is leading her in the dance. In these moments, Anastasia Gunlock has given Larry his dignity back. And that's one of the powerful things that music can do when used well. So in the last 10 years, this is the number of publications containing the words music and health. It's exploded. We're starting to see that music isn't just a nice to have. It's not just something that you tack on after everything else is there. It's something that is potentially essential for our health. But the same type of music, the same use of music doesn't always work in every situation. There are times where music can increase anxiety, where music can make you feel angry or more stressed. So instead of thinking of it as a sledgehammer, we think of it as a Swiss Army knife, that it has many different tools, but you need to know the right tool for the right purpose. So one of the purposes is in reducing anxiety, and I created a series of short videos for a collaboration with the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Institutes of Health called the Sound Health Network. And I want to play you one of these videos because it contains the story of a little girl named Evie. Now, Evie was born without eyes, so she's blind, and when she has to go and do medical procedures, she's terrified because she can't see what's happening. So let's see how she uses music to help her get through those difficult moments. Hi, I'm Dr. Indrė Viskontaitė. I'm a neuroscientist and a musician, and this is a quick look at how music impacts the human brain and body and how we can use it to improve our health and well-being. Undergoing a medical procedure can be a nerve-wracking experience, especially if you're in the hospital, where there are all kinds of strange noises, bright lights, and new people. Now imagine that you're blind and only 8 years old. The anxiety must be overwhelming. Meet Evie, born without eyes, in the hospital to test for seizures. understandably terrified. Is there anything that can help?
As soon as the doctor or nurse touches Evie, she just goes into PTSD, anxiety, cannot reason with her.
Singing, for many of us, brings us back to those comforting moments when we were sung to sleep or when we were soothed by our parents. But singing this song also helps Evie take some control over her environment, helping her realize that she's okay.
3, 2, 1. Can you sing Scars to Your Beautiful now?
She just wants to be beautiful. She goes, oh, best way to follow a darling. Beautiful just the way you are. And you don't have to change a thing or change a song.
As neuroscientists, we ask not just if it works, but why it works and what's happening in the brain when anxiety is reduced with music. There can be several answers. Oxytocin levels, for example, that's the attachment hormone, rise. We're also distracted from the object of our fear. But something else happens too. From the perspective of evolutionary biology, anxiety is a useful tool, and there are good reasons why we've evolved to feel anxious. Imagine our ancestors hear a rustling in the bushes. It's the population that worries that it might be a predator or other danger that survives, even when there isn't a predator there. So one of the interesting things about music is that it is by definition a safe sound. It's reassuring because it's not alerting us to danger. It was intentionally made by other humans, for the most part, to connect with us. Take a look at what that means to Evie.
Do you want to build a snowman? It doesn't have to be us. I can't say
Snowman.
snowman.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Please get my video.
Yep.
If you like this video, check out Sound. Okay, so that's just one example. For me, it's a very powerful one of how she takes control of the situation simply by singing. And that's where we can see that these specific use cases of music are what we need to know. We need to know the right dose, we need to know the right medicine, and that's why more research is warranted. But we also know that music education is something that is being cut from a lot of schools. So 5 years ago, I wrote this special report showing the way that music benefits us. And it's not just about making us smarter or to do better at math or other ways of measuring education, but it also helps us build character and community. And so one of the things that we wanted to know is if having this musical training is protective in later years in life. And sure enough, when we looked at this was from Viskontaitė, when we looked at people with their neuroimaging results who had 3 or more years of musical training, we found significant markers of better cognitive health in people who had musical training than in people who had no training at all. And this shouldn't surprise us because musical memory is often preserved even in the latest stages of Alzheimer's disease. So even people who no longer can talk or communicate in other ways often can communicate through music.
We first see Henry inert, maybe depressed, unresponsive, and almost unalive.
Henry.
Yeah?
Henry.
Yes,
I found your music. You want your music now?
Okay.
Let's try your music, okay? And then you tell me if it's too loud or not.
Then he is given an iPod containing his favorite music. And immediately he lights up. His face assumes expression. His eyes open wide. He starts to sing, to rock, and to move his arms, and he's being animated by the music.
And he used to always sit on the unit with his head like this. He didn't really talk to much people. And then when I introduced the music to him,
this is his reaction ever since.
So one of the things that we think happens in Alzheimer's disease, late in the disease, is the brain regions that normally act like an orchestra where they're synchronized together start to become detached from one another. And instead you just have these islands of activity in the brain and you can't pull it together. And that's why there's a lot of confusion, memory issues, and then eventually an inability to communicate. What music does is it syncs up our brain networks so it can entrain them to the rhythm. And in fact, we even synchronize our brains to the brains of musicians that we're listening to and to the music. Our brain waves literally synchronize to the music, but it pulls these networks of brain regions together. And some of these patients can even show better the effects of just this music listening even days later when they're tested. So about 1.5 years ago, this is the study that I did, or the performance that I did with the New World Symphony in Miami, where we had these EEG monitors on me, on the conductor, and on a cellist. And we projected on these massive screens these network brain activities in real time. And we noticed that over the course of a musical piece, first the orchestra musician's brain would synchronize to the conductor's brain, and then eventually the audience's brain would synchronize to them as well. And so this synchronization of how the brain works and how the brain goes up and down is what seems to be one of the ways that music pulls us together. But another way that we can track synchrony is through heart rates. And that's what we did during the Demonstrante. So here are two people with two different baseline heart rates. So one person's heart rate is a little bit slower, the other one's a little bit higher, but what you'll notice is that their peaks and their valleys are coming around the same time. So we can synchronize this variability and the ups and downs of our heart rates over time, and that seems to be one of the major ways that we feel connected to one another. So what we did is we looked at the synchrony, this kind of synchrony between performers or between audience members, or between performers and audience members over the course of the whole concert. And so here, what you'll see is that this is each one of these bars is a different song. And you'll see that there are some songs that had high synchrony, where these bars are higher, and some songs that had lower synchrony, where these bars are lower. And so we can see where in the concert people were synchronizing their heart rates. So the low synchrony songs were the ones that were only instrumental or brass instruments, so before the choir started singing. Or the one that was sung only by men, this is the song Chuto, and most of our participants were women, they were not singing during this particular piece. Or in the children. When the children were singing, our performers who were all over the age of 18 were not singing, and also we see lower synchrony. Interestingly, the audience members that we tracked had kids who were singing, and their synchrony increased when their children were singing. So it indicated an additional engagement. But the synchrony was highest in one of the songs in which everybody was standing, including the audience. So now imagine, instead of just 12,000 people standing and singing, you had 70,000 people standing and singing. And then this particular song, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then the entire last section, including Kūrigėlė žaliuoja, where it was the final Visos bendros giesmės, and it was sung by everyone, and that showed the highest rate of synchrony. Kūrigėlė žaliuoja is right here. It has higher synchrony than average, and it's within this high synchrony ending part, but the song just before had even higher synchrony, the kind of synchrony that my team from Denmark had never seen before in any of their studies. And so we went and looked at the video to see what it was. What was that song that everyone sang just before Kūrigėlė žaliuoja? So mūsų dienos kaip šventė, which I'm sure, most of us know very well, which induces everyone who wants to sing. And of course there was swaying, and it's the same thing in the audience. So we have our own ideas about why this song, at this time, at this point in the concert, was so powerful in synchronizing us. There are some controversies related to this song about what it meant when it was written, which was sarcastic and ironic, because it was based on a poem that was written in the 1950s that was essentially railing against Soviet occupation. It was said in irony, and yet now when you hear the words of the song, it does make sense in a kind of bizarre way, and yet it's been a part of the history, and it's been an emotional part of the history over the course of the last 50 years. So we could look at all these different elements, and we could look moment to moment, each of these songs, and we could track when there was more or less synchrony. But ultimately we find that there was synchrony when people were experiencing awe, and that's how awe has social benefits as well. It increases kindness and generosity, empathy and compassion. It promotes cooperation and helping. It reduces feelings of entitlement and increases humility, and it strengthens our sense of connection to others. This is why I think awe is necessary in our future, and I think it is a tool that can solve so many of the problems that we face. So coming back to the self-esteem, one of the other things we looked at was something called membership self-esteem, which relates to essentially whether you feel like you matter in your group. So no matter what group you belong to, do they care about you? Do you matter? Do you have a place? Do you belong in that group? And those who did not attend the Musvente or only watched it on TV, or did not watch it at all, I should say, showed a much lower mean score of membership self-esteem than those who sang in the concert, who showed the highest membership self-esteem of all. Those who watched on TV were slightly higher, but not that much higher. Those who attended in person were also higher. So each of these is a step towards feeling like you belong and that you matter. But nothing beats participating in the actual event. So awe also gives us meaning and purpose. It increases our sense of meaning in life, it enhances our spiritual well-being, it promotes gratitude, and it puts our daily stressors in perspective. And I want to finish with one last video of how I think awe, the experience of awe, and music can bring someone back from what are probably some of the most difficult situations. So I am on the board of a nonprofit organization called Project Music Heals Us. And what they do is they bring music to people who don't have any access to it. And they have 3 initiatives. One is, especially during COVID, they bring music to people in hospitals who cannot have visitors. So they do virtual concerts, or they go into wards where you're not allowed to have anyone come, and they play these virtual concerts for people one-on-one. They also go to parts of the world that are impoverished. They recently just came back from Kenya, where they were working with young people there who were in very dire straits and teaching them how to engage with music and even play a musical instrument. And one of their success stories was there was a young boy who they found on the internet who was picking through garbage in the slums of Nairobi, and he found an old violin. And he taught himself to play, and they gave him one-on-one lessons, and now he is a university student on a full scholarship at Bard College, studying architecture and music. And his goal is to go back to his hometown and build toilets so that that there can be more hygiene. So it's an amazing story of transformation. And then finally, the last initiative is in people who are incarcerated. And if you are incarcerated in the US, chances are you have lost all dignity, that you have lost your sense of meaning and purpose, that you have been essentially dehumanized. And so instead of just going in and playing music for people who are in these dehumanized situations, they teach them how to compose music so that the incarcerated individuals can get this membership self-esteem restored to them, and they can feel like they do, in fact, have a place in society.
You walk into our facilities, obviously you're looking at something to you that is dark and really sort of speaks punitive. These individuals are going through something really difficult. A jail is very challenging. The human condition is really taking a lot of hits.
You're at the bottom in society. People say that they care about you or that you have prisoners' rights. Not for real. Not real. When you're in the systems and you're in those areas, there are no real rights to anybody.
While there is a social justice movement in this country and laws are changing and things are evolving, right now there are people that are incarcerated. And so my role in being here is to help right now. And that's what I do. Teams of artists and musicians that come to our facilities to perform and run workshops. Offering that is important at this moment.
The world sees them as hardened criminals that should be punished and that we shouldn't interact with them and watch out for them and they're not even human, they're beasts.
But then you go into the space and you meet them and you realize that there are people just like you and me. There are people who have had joys and sorrows in their life. There are people who life has taken them in a different path, and there are people who are willing to speak to you and share their life experience with you in that moment.
We go in every day for 4 hours, and that allows us to start doing composition programs where if you've never touched a piano, you've still heard a tune in your head, and getting that tune out of your head and onto paper to accentuate what you're feeling.
You're heartbroken, you miss your wives, your girlfriends, you miss your fame, kids. I lost loved ones when I was in jail. My grandmother passed when I was in jail. I had my sister pass away. I had one sister. She was it.
He took that and wanted us to play something that would draw out the sadness of losing his sister.
Each of us was asked and said that we get an opportunity to create a piece of music. And I really started diving into it and trying to arrange a piece of music or get instruments to play together in my head. And we had gotten a rough draft done. They played it once for me, Rush, in the room. One of the most amazing moments of my life. So good.
Sounds great.
That was the first time in my life since my sister died, in any regard, that I had openly said anything to that magnitude that I had lost someone.
It's through music that people are able to express things that maybe they thought were shameful or maybe they thought were too private. And that moment where you make yourself vulnerable and it's not met with ridicule, but it's met with support and positivity, like that is a moment when people can really kind of realize there's a group here that is willing to be with me in whatever we're going through together. And before you know it, you have an entire group of people who is supporting one another.
To take something that's so raw out of yourself and put it down into something that's literally like, hey, this is my hurt, this is my sorrow, this is my pain, this is what I feel, and this is what it was for me. And it was great.
I mean, to me, that's redemption. That's some sort of connection to something deeper inside a human being that I don't get to witness that often. And here I am, of all places, in a jail, housing unit, and that happens. Power of music. It's right there.
Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go.
So 2 months ago, I was asked to come to Lietuva and present the results. And I presented everything that I've shown you, and then one more result, which is that people who came, whether they attended or they participated, valued their Lithuanian heritage more after the festival than before the festival. And Lietuva has been mandated to spend down 5% of their GDP or some number like that on securing their borders as part of the NATO pact. And one of the takeaways that the Ministry of Defense, who came and listened to that talk, took, was that maybe instead of buying one more tank, we can invest some of that money into helping people participate in the music making, in these cultural events, and build resilience from within the person rather than from simply outside. So thank you. So, any questions?
Turit savo knygą, kalbą, kurį esate išleidę, su savim ir parduodat.
Aš neturiu su savim ir iš tikrųjų aš galiu jums atsiųsti, jeigu jūs norite mano knygą, aš galiu jums PDF atsiųsti, todėl kad jinai yra truputėlį sunki skaityti, because the publisher decided to print silver font on blue paper. It looks very pretty. It's very hard to read, but I'm happy to send it as a PDF. And I'm currently working on my second book, which should be released about a year from now. And so I hope 2 years from now, you invite me back to talk about that, which is all about the science of meaningful experiences. But yes, you can get it on Amazon, or I'm happy to send you copies. I'm very proud of this book, but the next one that I'm writing now over the next year, I think is also going to be really important.
Ačiū, Indrė. This was wonderful. Should I speak in English or Lithuanian? English, okay. So in Cleveland, at the end of the concert,
yeah.
We're in the back row. We were in the nosebleed section. The Song Festival in Cleveland, the U.S. had. And when it's all over and people are starting to walk down the aisles, were you there?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah.
I was there.
So someone over there in the soprano section starts kūrybiškumui.
Yeah.
And so we're way in the back, and we see people stop. People stopped. People started joining in, and then the conductors are all on the floor, and all of a sudden,
Darius Polikaitis
runs over to direct. It was like a very spontaneous, beautiful moment, but everybody stopped.
Yeah.
It really stopped everybody from walking down the rows or leaving the auditorium. It was stunning. It was. Now I realize it was referring back to the Lithuanian Svente, but it was very moving for us as well.
I mean, I think, while, and Christina and Alex have been here all week too, earning some, I think, very well-earned rest. They were the leaders of the Cleveland Dainų Šventė that just happened at the end of June this year. And there was a lot of thought being put into the program. And when I talked to Christina afterwards, she said, we knew they were going to sing Kūrgirė Žalioji whether we programmed it or not. And in some ways, the experience that you're now describing was so much more magical and meaningful than if they had programmed it. Because it came from the joy of singing, it came from people's hearts, it came from this desire. And so I think that was a very, very meaningful moment. But it also goes to show that there is something in us that has this need for that connection. Even if you've just been standing for 4 hours after 4 days, that desire for that meaningful moment is there. And it connects us and it feeds us.
As a retired intensive care unit physician, I can absolutely, in my limited clinical studies, confirm your studies on the effect of music and ambulation. My most recent observations is that when I play Kurgireja Loya on the video screen for my 2 Netavuka grandchildren, 2 and 4 years old, their motion becomes absolutely, the perpetual motion stops, they become totally frozen and catatonic. So that's the opposite effect as we see in the Parkinson's patients. Unfortunately, that clinical phenomenon only lasts and then evaporates when the music is done, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much. It was really excellent, and I loved every minute, and I think this whole subject is so fascinating. But what I kept thinking throughout all of that is, and I see how music promotes the connection, but I think that connection is also there in the beginning, and the connection helps the music, like little Evie. It was all those people that were helping her, that already loved her and wanted her to be successful. And Ateitis, I was there too. It was unbelievable, but it was because of the connection, and then the music promoted more connection.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And if you don't feel connected to the music, it doesn't necessarily work. And if you feel, if in fact, so oxytocin, which is the hormone that is responsible both for synchronizing your brain and body rhythms and for this feeling of attachment, right? Oxytocin is the hormone that is released when a mother is nursing her baby, and so on. It's a big part. It's called the love hormone for a reason. But oxytocin has a dark side, which is that when oxytocin levels are high and you perceive someone as threatening, you are more likely to be aggressive to that threatening, to that threat. And that is how sometimes music that we associate with a threatening group can actually incite violence, can actually make us, get angry, and it can disconnect us. So that's why I call it a Swiss Army knife. It's not a sledgehammer. It doesn't work in the same way for everybody. And it very much depends both on how you perceive the music and whether it's your music or someone else's music. And if it's someone else's music, does that person threaten you? Right? That all matters. And there's this other side controversy even about the whole delusionante that people are like, well, it was a Soviet era thing. And it's a very, and so I think we would all disagree, but I can see where people are coming from in the sense that, okay, yeah, during the Soviet era, one of the ways that was used to induce people to behave a certain way was to make them sing a certain type of music and, together and so on. So I think that that has both its power and its peril, but that it is a way that we underestimate the way that it can sort of influence our relationships. And so we need to use it more positively. And I agree with you. It's not, there are moments where it's not the right tool, or that particular song or that particular genre is not the right tool. And it certainly makes a huge difference if you listen to your favorite song in a live concert with people surrounding you versus in your car in the midst of traffic, right? It is going to have a different impact on you, the very same sound. But when you are in the concert and you are surrounded by people that you feel connected to, it strengthens those bonds like nothing else.
No, just I'm still in awe after your talk, and I was just like felt that you were talking about myself in the first part of your talk, and it was all about the Šventė. And me, myself, I was like a schoolgirl participating in the very first Dainų šventės, Vingio Parkas, in the 70s and the 80s with moksleivių ir studentų šventės. And then with Aldona, we've been to 4 Dainų šventės in this country. So, and each time, our finishing song has been Giria žalioja, especially that she described how it ended this time. And we're always like feeling that like moment of the goosebumps that it's all, what is it's finished now. We're waiting for the next song festival. So it's just, we're waiting for this all to be on and on, going on and on. I've never been a viewer, unfortunately. Maybe I'm reaching this point that next time, my next song festival will be as a viewer,
Great.
Not as a participant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, you know what? Here's Kristina and Alexandras. Can we just give them a hand for creating Dainų šventė? I know you're going to be mad at me now for that. Sorry, but I can't help it. Okay.
Anyway, I wanted to thank you. And it's so fascinating, it's overwhelming, and it's awesome. What studies are you doing in the future or have started? What's next for you?
Yeah, so we're still writing up the results of this particular body of work, and I feel like we'll find more and more. But there are other things that now I'm very concerned about, and one of them is the continuation of understanding that the role of arts play in our health and well-being, but also the role that these generative AI tools are playing on our creativity. So a lot of my lab work is also now about how these tools affect the creative process, and can we use them in positive ways. So one of the studies, for example, now that we have just completed is about college application essays. And there's a lot of changes that are happening in college applications now that are making it harder for people from underprivileged backgrounds to get into college because universities are now being forced to go back to using measures like the SAT or GPA, which traditionally preference kids who come from richer households. But we found that this tool can automatically score application essays for items related to resilience, creativity, and so on, and that they are just as predictive of college success as the SAT or the GPA, but they're 15 times less discriminatory. So that's one of the things that we're working on now, is trying to give colleges a tool that allows them to continue to use sort of quote-unquote merit-based assessments, but ones that aren't necessarily tied to socioeconomic status. And then in general, I'm really interested in helping people leverage music in their daily lives in the most positive way. So some of the other work that I do now, like for example, I have a couple projects with big companies that are bringing music into the workplace, for example. I have a couple projects with one of the top 4 accounting firms globally to help them insert music into the workplace to help their workers have more resilience and be ready, more ready for change and so on. And part of the reason that I've pivoted away from some of the government-funded work is because government funding right now in science is very precarious. In fact, a lot of the grants that we have been relying on are now canceled. But the corporate world recognizes that making their employees happier and more resilient is going to help their bottom line. And so they're willing to fund some of this work moving forward. So So it's a bit of a pivot, but that's sort of where I'm looking now too, is trying to expand the view that music and the creative arts in general are what are going to keep us human in this AI, technology future, but also that they have benefits that go much beyond just simply, the icing on the cake. It's not the icing on the cake. It's actually the nutritious meal when we can be creative in our lives.
You referred to the Swiss Army knife and most of your examples have certainly been uplifting and very positive. Certainly, I'm still feeling goosebumps from that one. But also the blind child, the Parkinson's patient, etc. Have there been many studies or significant studies about the black side of it? People, autocrat wannabes who pump music in their, I'm looking for a word here, in stadiums, essentially to get people hyped up to do violence, for example.
So the evidence on whether music can incite people to violence is mixed. But we see, for example, teenagers who listen to heavy metal or aggressive music when they're driving, drive faster. So that's a kind of violence, right? If you're driving beyond the speed limit, that's car violence. In the case of, there isn't any evidence that people who listen to heavy metal music are more prone to violent behaviors, or that you can turn someone who is generally, relatively peaceful into somebody violent just by playing music. You can torture someone with the extremely angry music, and that's being used. And if someone already has the propensity towards violence, yes, in those cases, music can ramp up their adrenaline and ramp up their heart rate. But in and of itself, it doesn't seem to be sufficient. There's usually some other element that we can't tease apart. For example, in a lot of the angry sounding music, for example, there might be also cultural practices that are around certain drugs or certain other elements. So I would say the research is not shown that it is a tool that is very effective in terms of inciting violence, more effective than, say, playing violent video games. Now, that being said, even playing violent video games isn't always a clear pathway to enacting some of those violent video games in real life. There has to be some other circumstances. And in fact, for some kids who have trouble regulating their emotions, listening to angry music or even playing violent video games helps them control their emotions so that they don't act out. So there are some studies of using these as therapeutic tools and teaching the kids or the teenagers, it's okay if you're really angry and you don't know what to do with all these pent-up feelings, you can listen to this music, but then it remains in that room. And then at the end of it, they can then come away from that and it's cathartic. It's like why we listen to breakup songs when we're sad because somebody broke up with us, right? So there is that element, but it is complicated. It's not a clear line. And so I think it warrants further study, but it has never prevented me, for example, the science that I have read has not made me think, wow, I cannot let my kids listen to AC/DC or some of these other heavy metal bands. I don't want them to become part of a culture where violence is glorified, but I also want them to have an outlet to get rid of some of those teenage emotions that doesn't involve violence, and if it means, listening to music that makes them feel heard and seen, and then they can go and sit down and do their homework, then maybe that's okay.
Thank you. The little girl who was blind, she seemed to have a very a strong musical sense.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did you do any MRI studies on her to see? I work with visually impaired students, and we've seen a great deal of where students have inordinate talent in music, extraordinary memories, very strong musical sense, even perfect pitch is highly developed. Yep. And we have a student now who lost his vision at the age of 9 through cancer. Before 9, he was totally amusical, not interested. But when he lost his vision, just picked up on every instrument, plays the piano, the saxophone, the drums, the harmonica, the bass, and lives, eats, and breathes music now. So we figured that and his mother's a neurologist, but so we figured that part of the brain is being repurposed. Mm-hmm. So yep. Have you had any experience with that?
So there is a lot of great evidence that, especially in children whose brains are still developing, that if they lose input from one of the senses, the brain regions that normally would be assigned to processing information from that sense, so for example the visual system, then get reassigned to the more relevant sense. So in Evie's case, sound is a very relevant, important, useful sense for her because she has no vision at all. So she is very attuned to sound. That's one of the reasons why these medical procedures were so difficult for her, because it's not just that people are touching her, there are all these awful sounds in these environments. And those sounds she began to associate with pain or challenges or, etc. So that's why recapturing the sound and now giving herself that control is really effective for her. But certainly, and she has been in music therapy from the time she was, very little. So certainly I would absolutely expect that her brain would have rewired. But it brings up a sort of larger observation, which is that all brains are unique. Our brains are not all the same. We don't hear music the same way. And in fact, we see this absolutely in when we look at the brains of people listening to the type of music that they are most familiar with or that they love. Their brain literally hears it differently. And that happens with experience. So for example, if you've never heard jazz before and you're put in a jazz club and it's some, high-end avant-garde jazz, it just sounds like noise. You don't even know what to listen for. But if you have listened to jazz for 30 years and you know the melody of every single jazz song and you go into that concert and you hear what the person is doing in a way that nobody else does. Just like I think for a lot of us, Kūrybiškumui is meaningful to us not just because of the words or just because of the melody, but also because of the harmony, the structure. This is a folk song, it's a liaudies daina, which shares a lot of elements with a lot of other liaudies dainos that we have. And so we actually hear texture and things in it, and we can predict that people who are hearing it for the first time might not be able to. So absolutely, that's a great point, is that we talk about the musician's brain as a model of neuroplasticity. And basically what that means is that we can very easily see through musical training, which is intensive and takes years, the brain changes. And we can track those changes, and it is different. And it turns out it's protective from cognitive decline, and it has a bunch of other benefits.
That was a fascinating question. Yeah, mine is kind of different. There have been a lot of demonstrations in this country in support of people who... Oh, I'm sorry. In support, a lot of demonstrations in this country in support of people who are different, for rights of immigrants and for Ukraine and against the increase in dictatorships, both in this country and abroad. But I noticed, at least in Boston, these demonstrations are very quiet. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of positive energy, with everybody feeling a togetherness. But there is no music. There is no, and my understanding is that, I wasn't there, but I think in Lithuania was demonstrating for independence in the late 80s. Song was big in the demonstrations, and in the 60s when people were demonstrating against the Vietnam War, song was important. What's going on? Why are these demonstrations so quiet? Is it like that in other cities too, or just in Boston?
Yeah, so I mean, I have two thoughts about that. One is that because we have become so isolated, we don't have a common musical language anymore, the way we used to, even in the 60s and 70s. We don't listen to the same songs. There isn't a radio that we can turn on and, listen to the top 10 pop songs. Instead, we're all listening to our very own curated Spotify playlist or whatever it is. And so there isn't a common musical language the way there has been in the past in the pop world. There are all these niches. So there are very few songs that everybody can sing and know. But the other part, I think, which is the bigger tragedy, which is one that I'm really fighting against, and ultimately, the underlying, hopefully the one takeaway here, is that it doesn't matter if you're a good musician or if you've been trained, you need to participate in the music making, because that's where you're going to get the benefit. And because we have so many cuts in school music programs, because our kids are playing sports instead of going to band or, etc., because the musical training has been outsourced to, the playlists and we're not teaching our kids basic music literacy anymore. And that's a real problem. And I think that that's really where we can have a big impact, is to just teach people. You don't need to have a PhD in music in order to, or, a degree in music to play music. You don't even need to be good. You just need to do it. You just need to try, and then we can get back our common musical language. But I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of these demonstrations in this past year have not been as successful. A lot of people showed up, but without a common musical language, it doesn't have the same punch. It doesn't have the same impact. And so hopefully, if people continue to believe in these causes, they will begin to find the musical language behind that, and I think that will improve. But you've been really great, and I don't want it. Yeah. Thank you. Actually.